So what I'm going to be talking, by the way, let me thank you, Johan, for such an interesting presentation. I didn't know those myself. So, well, good evening. I'm Paolo Mendoza. I'm one of the people in the engineering team here at Friendster. Admittedly, one of the newest as well, being a Java programmer in the past. So, which is the reason which brought me to this little presentation, some down-to-earth best practices on Ruby on Rails. Typically, when we talk about best practices, we talk about profiling, we talk about performance management, we talk about all this logging. But as when we start out programming in Ruby, the first question that comes to mind is, how do I do these simple tasks? Or why doesn't this work? Or why is this too slow? So what we're going to be talking about here tonight is probably the obvious to a lot of people, but it has really helped a lot when I was starting out with Ruby. And I think if there are any beginners out there, you might be able to catch a thing or two. So we're talking about some better coupling between active record associations. We always talk about decoupling or coupling, so we'll talk about that in greater detail. And we'll talk about how to clean up our code. Typically throughout the year we'll do some rounds of technical debt, and we want to see, we find ourselves with code that, what the hell does this do? Or we'll probably try to look at it for an entire day and figure out how to do it. So one of the ways to prevent it is to write cleaner code. It might not help on the performance side, but I'm pretty sure productivity is also one of the performance metrics in many of the places we work at. And just plain cool. We also I'll also demonstrate in how to use the query attributes to create cleaner ERV. So these are very simple examples, but I hope you are able to catch a thing or two. So the first things first, we always, when I go online to talk about, take a look at what are the best practices in Rails, we talk about slim controller, fat model. In fact, one of the colleagues that I was working with that trained me here has been complaining about very big controllers that had the programming logic. And in a way, it kind of makes sense, at least as a beginner, because I want the flow, the execution, and the flow, the invocation of the different business logic to be in that place. And my view is that the model is simply a persistent storage. But then that's when I found out I was wrong. So take a look at this controller, for instance, which is relatively simple. The only thing this controller actually does, the only method invoked on this controller simply returns 200. That's all it does. And it becomes clear what the controller actually does because we structured it in such a way that we use filters and we abstract the validation of the records to the model. So, yeah. So we have, that's the only action being done, and we abstract the validation to the model. And here's a view of the model. I never intended for anyone to read the model. I just wanted to see, I wanted to show how complex the model is. How about the model? This is the model for something that returns HTTP 200. But let's examine the parts. So we do all the validation at the model. So we have presence validation, uniqueness validation, and it becomes clear in the onset about what we are trying to validate. So that's the point I'm trying to raise. Then we also have the specific logic that we have. So if there are any conditions that we may encounter, this is where we want to do that differentiation. Then we also want to add our custom validations. So here we can implement the business logic and return an active record type of error to our controller should the validation fail. So anything business specific we actually placed in the model. At first, my opinion is, why do we want to put business rules in active record when active record is supposed to manage a specific convention? But I found that it's far more convenient to put it right there, and easier to see. So we want to delegate that business logic to our models. And controllers might want to blow that view of putting a lot of logic in that controllers. It should only take care of the request, do some invocation necessary in order to delegate that request to a helper, to a model, or some other functionality within your program. Then the only thing it's supposed to do after that invocation chain is to return a response. Anything in between should not be done in that controller, and I can't stress that point greater. You also want to use filters to define a preset chain of methods before processing that request. So in this example, we have 3 filters that do one specific preparation, another preparation. We want to see what sequence they're being done. So just imagine if we placed in the create method invocations to those 3 methods. And worse, what if we don't do it consecutively? So the best way to do that consecutively is by creating a filter chain. So the stress, what I'm stressing out here is that it's important to realize what before filter does. So for beginners, your before filter are blocks of code that will be executed before going into the main method. So say I make an HTTP request and the route say it will go to the create method. Before it even goes to the create method, the request I made has gone through these 3 filters. So by going through these 3 filters, we achieve that commonality. You can even add options in before filter that would only work on, say, create, will only work in show, or specific methods that you may have. So having that filter chain actually helps you establish that commonality, because after all, it's one controller. So the business transactions that we'll be doing is probably has that degree of commonality, and you want to put that commonality in the filters. Then you can also handle exceptions in the controller. I've tried to handle exceptions elsewhere, such as the models or anything, but then what it results is that I would either have a stack trace returned back to me or something undesirable. By handling it at the controller level, such as in this case, we can specify the specific HTTP status code that we want to return, and there's that uniformity about what happens when the exceptions occur. So what I do is I throw those exceptions up the chain. So pretty much that's what I can say about having a slim controller and a fat model. I don't expect everybody to do everything, but what it's trying to say is that you want to put all your organization-specific functions in the model. Then another thing we want to talk about here, this is out of place, is the law of Demeter. And when I was working as a Java developer, we always say law of Demeter, but then my question was, how does it work in Ruby? And I realized after some time how it does. For those who are not familiar, the law of Demeter says that we should be invoking methods. We should be invoking methods on only the the object or class that we have. So we want to do away with this example, where employee is has a value, and then it has a field called boss, which is yet another object, and we want to invoke the method name on that boss. So what if it's nil? Or what if we want to change the implementation of boss? Or what if the boss is not even a boss? So we don't enforce that coupling as much. And I found a cute little way of making it this way instead, where I am actually invoking the method on the employee object. So in fact, what I'm doing is I'm delegating the call to boss through employee. So should the boss change or should the implementation change, the code will survive. And in case there is some incompatibility, I would know beforehand. I don't have to go at runtime to find out that the name method does not exist on the new boss. And how did I do it? Well, I used one of the callbacks in Active Record called delegate. By using delegate, we can specify a specific method so here we specify to, which is the destination object for our method call. And here we say which method we're trying to delegate to this specific object.
So the name method exists on the boss object, typically, or?
The name method exists on the boss object.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is, we're trying to invoke the name method on the boss object from the employee object. So what the employee object will do is that it will delegate a specific method in itself, which is actually a delegate to the boss object. And if you look at the prefix, this is what establishes the name of the method. If you put if we set this to false, what we're doing is that employee.name equals boss.name, which we don't want to do. So we put the prefix in, which is the reason why our invocation puts the name of the object we delegated to, and then the name of the method on that object. So if we put false under prefix, then we are in fact calling, when we call employee name, we are in fact calling boss name, which we probably don't want to do. So by turning on the prefix, you will find the use of the convention where it will be the object name and then the method name on that object that was delegated. Then let's have a short demo of how that's being done. So here we have a normal scaffold, which is a list of employees. I modified it a bit such that if I show one of the records, I can also see who the boss is. So in this case, Larry De Leon has the boss named Cynthia Luster. And let me show you the code of how it is right now. So this is the conventional way of doing it. We get the employee's boss and we invoke the name on that boss. But we can make that modification in the employee model. So we can turn on the delegation and turn on the prefix. So once we modify the method call to boss underscore name, we should see that it will still have the same result. So let me go back and let me show a different record, such as this machine operator. If you will notice, the record still has the same functionality even though we modify.
So when you delegate, does the delegation protect you against nil and stuff like that? Is that advantages?
Nil, the kind of protection it gives for nil happens more on the validation callbacks. Unfortunately, if the boss is nil, it will still throw an error much in the same way as it will throw an error if you go boss.nil. So that's why in this code also we have that checking.
If, right, okay. So you still have to check.
We still have to check, unfortunately. However, if you want to do the validates presence off, validates uniqueness off, in case an object, in case the boss is nil, there is a setting which is allow nils true that will hide the error. But I think my personal opinion is that I'd rather see the error rather than not find it later on. So that's one of the things that we were able to come up with when we were learning Ruby the first time. So the law of Demeter essentially says that Paolo should only talk to its immediate members or association. So it should not invoke methods on its association or get properties from its association. It's an example of loose coupling. So instead, we create that wrapper method. And by the agile principle of don't repeat yourself, don't create the method that wraps it. I did that once, where I created a method that then invokes the object and then invokes the name of that object. So don't repeat yourself. Active record allows you to create that wrapper method. And when performing the valid, as I answered Yanis, it protects you against nil on validations. Unfortunately, elsewhere, it will still be nil. So you need to you can't get away with validating nil. But the good thing is, I found also a nice way of validating for nil that makes it cleaner. Typically, one of the ways we validate nil is by checking if something is blank. At first, I was checking for nil, but then, yeah, it's not nil, but it's blank. So I learned early on in my journey with Ruby that blank is a catch-all. So here in this code example, if the salary of the person is blank in the database, then we display 0. Because if we don't do that, we just use employee.salary. If the salary is nil, it will throw an error. So we still want to do that validation. But there's, as the label says, it's yucky ERB because there's a cleaner way of doing it. Turns out that active record for all of the members, all of the properties also has query methods. Query methods are the ones that have the question mark in the end. So in this case, upon invoking the salary method on the employee object, we're in fact checking whether it's nil or it's present. It returns true if it's present, it returns false if it's nil. So it allows me to replace this code with this one-liner over here. So by using all of the properties in active record have the corresponding query methods. So you will be able to know already beforehand whether it's nil, it's blank, by using the query method. So when you say employee.salary with a question mark, you are in fact testing whether the value is present or not. And by this shorthand true or false operator, so it's either employee.salary or 0, you are in fact doing that one-liner. So you replaced this terrible looking code with something much more clear. I also prepared a short demo of how to do that. So if you will take a look at this listing of employees, the first employee, Miss Batumbakal, does not make anything. Either she doesn't make anything or the data entry operator failed to enter a salary. So we display that as 0, but had we not have the validation, had we not had this validation here, in fact we can probably demo. If we didn't have this validation here, and we just displayed employee.salary, we will probably have an exception. It was just blank. But it will have an exception when I press show. Of course, we don't want blank either, as much as we don't want nil, because then the question is, what's it? What is it? Did it fail, or is there some other reason? So we want to be explicit. So let's uncomment the if else. So we now have 0. But we don't want this dirty looking code anyway. So let's take it out. And let's put back the shorthand. So to give, if anyone didn't know, what we do is shorthand. We have a condition that returns true or false. Then we delimit it with a question mark. Then here is what happens when the value is true. Then separated by a colon, this is what happens when the value is false. That's how we have that logic of either showing the salary or showing 0. So let's put this code in. And here, it's a one-liner. And let's refresh the page. It still has the same result. So, in summary, as I stressed a while ago, each active record model attribute has a query method. So you can get user.id or employee.name to check for its presence. You can use it instead of .present, .blank, .nil when checking for the presence or absence of an attribute. So pretty much that's it for me. They may sound very simple, but I've found a lot of situations where they come in handy. Perhaps we can also, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I have a suggestion. Why don't you just pour salary with 0?
I could also do that. I can probably override one of the methods that
No. Just in your expression.
Or equal.
Just employee salary or 0. Or. So
Yeah.
the result of that expression will be, if employee salary is nil, it will be 0.
Yeah, with the or. Yeah, that's also possible. And would save or. Nil lang ba yung or?
So nil
Nil
or
or
0
zero or
or
false.
0.
But what if it's black? It's
It's going to continue. It's going to continue to 0.
Okay. Any other questions or suggestions?
Is it the bad mod slave controller per se? From what I've seen, the trend is going towards a new architecture where, aside from the MVC, another domain will hold all your domain logic.
So other than the model.
Yes. Have you heard of PCI? Data context interactions?
No. One thing that I, like I said, on a more simple kind of way, the best I have probably seen is delegating them to helpers and other things. But based on the experience I've had, pretty much I haven't really touched into that. If we were, but on a purely language agnostic perspective, it would actually make sense to put some domain logic outside of the actual models. In fact, that's the reason why I put them in the controller in the first place, because I don't want to put them in the models. But I can't find the wiring in Ruby to do that. There are a lot of frameworks, for instance, in other programming languages like Java that has dependency injection, where you can actually inject a filter chain or a chain of objects that will be invoked before the model is even invoked. So if you want to look into that pattern, you can try the Spring framework that has that allows you to declare beans, and it would have an invocation chain, and then when you set these invocation chains, which are actually interceptors, they are processing the logic before going to the actual models that will be used, but they're not the controller. So that's something you can look at for the framework. So typically what I would suggest is that we use the right tools for the right job. So for instance, in Rails, what we're trying to do here, and I would tend to agree that a lot of aspiring programmers get a huge head start with Rails, and it allows you to develop applications in a short period of time. So for that specific application, we might not want to take a look into the complexities. But as our needs grow, we can take a look at perhaps this might not be the best tool already, or we might find a better tool that would help us do our job. So we want to be appropriate when selecting which tool or which language we want to work with. We want to be appropriate, which allows me, which just for a few minutes I'd like to share another experience I had. We had a business discussion, more like an argument, about which technology or platform to use for maintaining non-SQL records, maintaining relationships. And there were two solutions that were present. Both were promising, and the other solution I personally preferred because it had a lot more documentation and it had that overall robustness. But as a business, we didn't choose that. First one, it cost too much. Second, all we're trying to do are store friendships without locking tables. That was the problem we were solving. And like my colleague Andrew here says, let's be reactive rather than proactive in solving the problem. So you don't want to nuke the cockroach. So we tried to select the best tool for that job was not the high-performing database, but something that was open source and was readily available. So I guess, I don't know if that made any sense, but something to think about.
I heard what you said with the different names, domain classes, or domain models, or business classes. So the idea is, I think it actually came from the Java and Microsoft world, and it's only just catching up in the Ruby world. The idea is use active record just as a storage, so your active record models will not be fat anymore. The bulk will be in the business classes. All the logic will be there. You will have plain Ruby classes, and they will wrap your active record classes. And the beauty here is your business logic will be in a plain Ruby class. So it will be so fast, so easy to test. You don't need factories. You can just use OpenStruct to mock them when you're testing your code. So it's simple to load and
Looks exciting. I'd really like to take a look into that, and perhaps we can continue that discussion at the users group, and maybe on the next meetup we can all collaborate and show how that works. So, well, thanks a lot for your time. I really hope that we'll be able to spark new discussions and also clear some stuff as we go along. Thanks a lot and good night.
Thank you.